tell you, high school was a real difficult time in my life because back in the 1970s, late 70s, feathering was a thing, and my hair was not feather. I can remember spending hours in the bathroom trying to blow dry my hair with feather. I would go to school and I was so jealous of these guys who just like had this perfectly feathered hair. That was not me. I had to work at it. And then I went off to college, and I know you're going to have a hard time believing that this is the same hair. But look at that. And this is not a perm, okay? I had actually curly hair, and so I was trying to feather that curly hair. So this is me when I go off to college. So this is an important time in my life because this is where I go off and I start finally, for the first time, trying to get my own sense, my own worldview of who I am and what my place in the world is. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So I go off to Evangel College. It's now Evangel University, and this is a school that was at the time noted as being a Christian liberal arts school within my parents' tradition of Assemblies of God. And, I went there largely because I didn't know where else to go. This is where all my siblings went. This is where I was kind of expected to go. And again, not having a lot of education in my background, this seemed like a good, safe place for me. It ended up being the right place for me, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But this was me at college, and probably the most miraculous thing that happened is that this guy at college actually convinced someone to marry him. And the amazing thing is that I convinced this amazing person to marry me. This is my wife, Kelly, and this is our wedding, obviously. And believe me, she had much better options. And so I'm not exactly sure what I did to convince her, but I can tell you it was a hard sell because it was not love at first sight. Now, I was pretty taken with her, but she was not all that taken with me. Again, for good reason, but I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But really, my story, as I said, that's kind of me growing up and what brought me up to this point in time in my life. But really, the story of my life is about the relationships I've made along the way. So I kind of want to talk a little bit about some of those relationships and why they meant so much to me and why they shaped the person I am today. So these are my parents. I've already talked a little bit about them. This was actually a photo of them around their 70th anniversary. Next month in May, they will have been married 72 years. So this photo's 2 years old, but my mom is 93, my dad is almost 92, and they're doing amazingly well. A little over a year ago, my mom did break her hip, but she's back up and walking. So they look pretty good, right, for people in their 90s, and they're in incredible health. A couple years ago, my dad was visiting, and he likes to play golf, so I took him out to golf. In fact, there's a photo of us. And he was out, and we went out with Mark Gambiana, who is our former vice president for advancement, a very good golfer. And there's a creek out at the golf course, and at the time, my 90-year-old dad, it had rained, and there was kind of some flooding on the creek. He steps back, he runs, and jumps about 5 feet over the creek. Now, I'm just kind of used to my dad doing that, so I didn't even like think anything, but Mark was like, he was actually, any athleticism I have, I got from this guy here. He really was an amazing athlete, was a good high jumper in high school, pretty remarkable person. But what I learned from my parents is living a life that is thriving for greatness. And not greatness in a look at me kind of sense, but really in a magnanimous sense. That my dad and my parents were restless until they felt they were doing what they would consider God's calling on their life. And so I grew up in a household where there was an expectation that you would try to do something significant with your life, that you would be magnanimous, that you would be restless until you found your vocation. I was thinking of this, and I was thinking of Anton Chekhov's play, Ivanov, and the character Ivanov in that is actually giving advice to a recent college graduate. And it's the opposite of being magnanimous. His advice is this: you left college last year, and you are still young and brave. I have the right to advise you. Ivanov is about 35 years old at this time. Plan your life for quiet. The grayer and more monotonous you can make the background, the better. My parents would not have paid any mind to this advice. My parents believed, now again, this is their worldview, but that they were called to try and bring God's kingdom on earth. So my dad has devoted his life to this cause, and even at age 91, he goes out and raises over $1 million a year for missions. And he travels the globe at age 91. In fact, I went to Cuba with him last September just because one of us has to travel with him now just to keep an eye on him. And it's always the kid's job, whoever travels with him, to make sure he doesn't die. Or if he does die, at least get the body back. Right? So that's my one job in Havana, is to make sure my dad doesn't die, or if he does die, get the body back in one piece. Well, I'm claustrophobic, okay? And many of you probably haven't been to Cuba, a lot of people haven't yet, but the infrastructure is falling apart there after 60 years of neglect. Not surprisingly, we were staying in actually one of the nicer hotels, but I can tell you the elevator was spooky. It was small and claustrophobic. It kind of would stop here and there. And so I just decided one night, we were on the 9th floor, I wasn't going to go up on the elevator. So I just said, Dad, I'm going to take the stairs. So I start walking up the stairs. I get up on about the 3rd flight of stairs, and I turn around, and there's my 91-year-old dad following me up the steps. Like, okay, now any son at that point in time probably would have said, we're going to go catch the elevator. But no, not me. I just kept walking up. And I thought about it, the 6th flight, I was going to lose my dad. But he made it. He made it 9 flights of stairs. But he's really a remarkable person. Now, you know, as I've sort of developed my own worldview, I kind of view my worldview with my parents' worldview as a Venn diagram. I think there are some things that we certainly share in common, things I've learned from them that I still hold true and I'm committed to. But there are a lot of things I don't agree with my parents. But what I do agree with is that they are living a life, a magnanimous life, the thriving of the human spirit toward greater things. A life committed to something larger than just yourself. So this is something they taught me at an early age, growing up in that type of household that has stayed with me. So the person here was a professor at Evangel, an American history professor. His name is Dr. Larry Nelson. And when I went off to Evangel, I was pretty clueless. I didn't know what I wanted to major in. I didn't know what I wanted to be. I didn't know really what was important. I just can remember sitting in church a lot, and again, kind of not knowing what my place was there. Oftentimes hearing the sermons, hearing the do's and the don'ts. Oftentimes, quite honestly, probably identifying more with the sinners than the saints and the biblical stories. I go off and I walk into this Intro to American History class with Dr. Larry Nelson. And there was something about him and the way he talked about history that just ignited something inside of me. It stirred something. And I began to listen to this guy carefully because he was talking about history in a way that I'd never heard before. Now, certainly I owe a lot to him because he started introducing me to this concept of liberal arts education and critical thought. But I think the most important thing that Dr. Nelson taught me as I reflect back on his influence on my life is to strive for an empathetic understanding of the human experience. And the human experience is a complex one. And that is really, in many ways, what helped me begin to discover my own path, my own vocation that I had been searching for. I didn't know that I was going down that path, but looking back, I knew it was the beginning of that road. I had the distinct honor, just a couple months ago. Dr. Nelson died about 2 years ago of a brain tumor. We had stayed in touch. He had known about my own life journey and the influence he had had in my life. He had left Evangel and taught most of his career at the University of North Alabama. And they began a speaker series in his honor. So a couple months ago, I was invited to go down to the University of North Alabama and talk about Dr. Nelson and the influence he had had on my life. What an honor that was, to be able to go full circle and go back and tell his family and his students and his former colleagues what Larry Nelson meant to me now 35 years ago. The interesting thing is Dr. Nelson and I only interacted for 2 years at Evangel because he left there after my sophomore year, and I was heartbroken. I took as many classes as I could from him. And what was great is that at least at that time, there were about a half a dozen other faculty members at Evangel who also were introducing me to this empathetic understanding of the human experience. English professors, philosophy professors, history professors. But in that short amount of time, 2 years, he had this profound impact on your life. And so sometimes it's not the length of time, the length of the relationship. It's the depth of the relationship. And in that short 2 years, Dr. Nelson changed my life. So this is my wife, Kelly. And many of you know her. And she's the third person I want to talk about. As I said earlier, I thought it was nothing short of a miracle that I convinced her to marry me to begin with. But the real miracle is that I ever found her to begin with. Much like my grandparents, Kelly came from a fairly poor background. She went off to Evangel after sitting out a year, and she worked her way through school as a waitress on Pell Grants. And there was something amazing about her spirit. Not only did I think she was beautiful, I thought there was something inside of her that was unique, something that I needed. In some ways, and she was an antidote to some of my own internal isolation or fear of shame. I was once told that shame is worse than guilt. Guilt is feeling bad about something maybe you've done. But shame is feeling that you are not worthy, that you are not good enough. And in many respects, I think growing up in that church all those years, I maybe didn't feel shame, but I certainly had a fear of shame. And in Kelly, I found someone who, for whatever reason, saw something in me that caused her to love me. But more importantly, over my 31 years of marriage to Kelly, what I've seen day in and day out is kindness in action. Kindness is different than niceness, right? We all know people who are nice. That means they're basically pleasant, right? Pleasant to be around. Yeah, and it's good to be around nice people. But kindness is something more profound than niceness. Kindness is someone who is kind to someone, but still holds on to their own ideals, their own values, their own convictions. They do not blow with the wind, but yet they are still kind to everyone, regardless of their station in life, regardless of their own beliefs, whether they agree with you or not. And kindness is contagious. What I've seen with Kelly over my 31 years with her is that she changes people through her kindness. The other thing, the other great gift she has given me is joy. She's the most joyful person I've ever met. And sometimes people ask me, is that real? It is. And someone who suffers from a bit of melancholy, I can tell you, that is the miracle I needed. And I'm so thankful. This is my family. These are my daughters. Chloe is the one, she's the youngest one, but she's taller. That's Chloe. And that's Sophie, my oldest. She's 18. Chloe is 16. Chloe's the one who hates me right now. We'll talk more about that later. Sophie's off to college, so she doesn't care. So, my daughters anyone who's had kids can tell you the profound impact that having kids will have on your life. Certainly expands your capacity to love, and it really is a miraculous thing to have this opportunity to love someone unconditionally, right? This is what you do with children. But when I think about my daughters, I think differently about the impact they've had on our life. And I don't know if any of you have had this experience, but those like me who sort of suffer from a lot of self-doubt and recrimination and wondering if you're good enough and kind of beat yourself up over a lot of things, I'll go home and I will be with my parents after not being with them for a long time. And I'll hear something my mom or my dad says, and I'll go, oh gosh, that sounds just like me. I'm turning into my parents, right? And you're like, oh no. Well, it's interesting, when you have kids, you also see yourself. You see things about yourself in your kids, right? And you're like, oh, that's me. Uh-oh, yep, that's me too. But you love them. And you love that that is a part of them. In many respects, the miracle is that your children, when you identify yourself in them and you love them for all of them, who they are, what I found is that I've begun to accept myself. The good, the bad, and the ugly. So, some of you probably know who these gentlemen are. If you don't, for the students, I'm going to tell you, these are the patriarchs of Truman State University. Okay? We have Charles McLean Hall, if you don't know, president here from around 1970 to 1989. For 1 year as an interim, Dr. Dager, who is a long-term dean of our School of Business. Jack Magruder, who was Magruder Hall, yes, but president here from 1994 to 2003. And then this is Daryl Kruger. And Daryl Kruger was the interim president right before I became president. I have this photo here because I have been given the great gift of mentorship throughout my life. For whatever reason, whether it's Dr. Nelson or Peter Levine, who is my dissertation advisor, or in the case of Dr. Kruger, there have been people in my life who saw something in me, and they decided to invest in me. For the life of me, I oftentimes did not know what they saw in me, but they gave of themselves and of their time to mentor me, to be there for me, to help guide me, to share their wisdom with me. So Dr. Kruger, if you've heard this story, I apologize. I just think it's a cool story, so I'm going to tell it again. When I went to Winona State University, that's where I was before I came to Truman, I had gone back. I went to law school after Evangel, practiced law for a few years. Then I went to Michigan State to get my PhD. So I did that because I decided after practicing law for a few years that once again I was restless until I found my vocation. So I pursued my education, get my PhD, in hopes that I could have a life in academia, much like Dr. Nelson. Well, I went out on the job market, and guess what? In the mid-1990s, there weren't many jobs for history professors. I've sent out about 70 applications and visas to various schools around the country, and I didn't hear from any of them. And so Kelly was pregnant with Sophie, our first, and I needed a job. So I called my old law firm and I said, is there a place for me because I'm not getting a job in education, and so I need to come back home. So they said, yes, sure. We were all packed up, ready to go to Indianapolis. Now, the clear blue, I get the call from Winona State University's history department and the department chair, Alex Yard, and asked if I'm still interested in the job. And I have to be honest with you, I didn't even know I had applied for it. I applied to Sophie. But of course, I was eager to say yes. And shortly after Sophie was born, I drove to Minnesota for an interview. And as I was on the interview, Alex informed me that part of the interview was to meet with the university president. And I thought, well, that's a strange practice. Why would a university president take the time to interview someone who's applying for an assistant professor job? I was told this was his practice, and he had learned it from his mentor. And by the way, his mentor, this guy, Charles McLean. Because what I didn't know at the time is that Dr. Kruger was the chief academic officer here at Truman State University in the 1970s and 1980s, while Charles McLean was the president. And while then Northeast Missouri State University went through the mission change to become Missouri Public Liberal Arts and Sciences University. And so I go and I meet with Dr. Kruger, and I was warned by Alex before I went into the office that he's a little strange. Nice guy, we like him, he's our president, we've grown to love him, he's real earnest, but just beware. So I didn't know what that meant, but when I went into the interview and I sat in his office, the guy didn't say a word. He just sat there with his arms crossed, looking down, looking as if he was sleeping. And so, just like I'm doing tonight, I started filling the silence with my voice. I can't remember what I said, but I just started talking. And at some point in time, I asked him the question, at a public university, where do you see the role of the liberal arts? And it was at that point in time that Dr. Kruger perked up and sat on the edge of his seat and began talking about his own passion for the liberal arts and how it serves a public purpose. I didn't know anything about Northeast Missouri State University and Truman or Dr. McLean or any of that. I just knew that I had made a connection. And over my time at Winona State as a faculty member, Dr. Kruger continued to invest in me. I think he kept his eye on me, the things I was doing on faculty, but ultimately when there was an opportunity, when the dean's job opened, I heard through the grapevine that Dr. Kruger wanted me to apply. And so I had the opportunity to apply to become a dean. I did it, and then during a 1 year as dean, Dr. Kruger in his last year at Winona State took me into his office and mentored me on a weekly basis, spending time with me, talking about his own career, his own experience in higher education. But most importantly, he talked about his time here at Truman State University, then Northeast Missouri State University, and what he had learned through the transformation of this university. I can remember on his going away party, his retirement party, I went up to shake his hand to thank him for everything he had done for me. And he looked at me and he said, "I'll be back for your inauguration." And I was blown away by that. I was a lowly dean and a new dean at that. I hadn't been on faculty even that long, and for him to have that kind of confidence in me meant the world to me. Now, of course, I thought he meant maybe someday I would become the president of Winona State University. Fast forward, in 2007, I get a call from a search consultant about the chief academic officer job, the provost position, here at Truman State University. And because of everything I'd learned about this school from Dr. Kruger, I said, yeah, I would be interested in exploring this opportunity. So that began my relationship with this university. So I went through the interview process, had the good fortune of being offered the job, accepting the job, and moving here in 2008 to be the provost. Well, those of you who weren't around back in the summer of 2008, it was an interesting time in the life of this university. And I can remember right before I started my job, the president's office here contacted me saying that President Dixon, the president who had hired me, wanted to meet with me prior to my beginning my position on July 1. So I remember coming into the office at 200 McLean, closed the door, sat down. After a few niceties, she informed me the day, I think it was about the day before I started working, that she was contemplating resigning as the president. So I just moved my family to Kirksville. We were renting a house. We were in boxes the day before I started, and I'm told by the person who hired me, who brought me here, that she was considering resigning. Well, okay. I remember getting in my car, calling Kelly, and saying, "Don't unpack." It was a very uncertain time in our life, to say the least, and for the next few months, I didn't know if I was staying or if I was going. I didn't know if I should jump right back out on the job market, or if I should just do my job, keep my head down, and see what happens. I decided on the latter. Ultimately, President Dixon did resign, and I remember getting a call from the board chair at the time, Mark Wassinger, And he first of all wanted to reassure me, which I was happy to finally get that reassuring call, that this isn't about you. We want you here. We're happy to have you here. We're bringing in an interim president so that we can ultimately conduct a search for the next president. And so we are bringing to be the interim president at Truman, Darryl Kruger. And so I was like, you've got to be kidding me. You can't make this, no, I'm not going to say that. You can't make this stuff up. So the reassuring thing is that here's a man who had already invested so much into me, coming back to be my boss. And I don't know if the board, I see one board member here who lived through this, and I don't know if they knew this. I'm sure Peter Ewell probably knew that I had a relationship with Dr. Kruger. I don't know how it happened. I don't know if it was divine intervention. But the fact that Dr. Kruger was coming back allowed me an opportunity to take a breath. The board gave me the opportunity to be the 16th president at Truman State University, and I had the distinct privilege and honor to work under Dr. Kruger for about 20 months during a very challenging time in this university's history. So they were like dog years for me in terms of higher ed administration. And this is the board. Cheryl, you're not there. I don't know why not, but you're not in that photo. This is the board that hired me. And I owe them so much. They gave me the opportunity. An opportunity of a lifetime to lead this amazing university. Again, I'm not exactly sure what they saw in me, but they saw something that gave me this great responsibility, but also amazing opportunity. And I have had the distinct privilege over the last 6 years to have every single board member that I have served for invest in me, show faith in me, support me in ways that I cannot describe. This is the current board. And they have continued, and even in my announcement, when I called them and told them that I was going to be leaving, many were disappointed, maybe they all were disappointed. But without exception, they have been there for me and have supported me in my decision and what I thought was right for me and my family and this university. So when I think of the people who've invested in my life, I think about investing in other people's lives. And this is Dr. Sue Thomas. And on July 1, she'll be the interim president here at Truman State University. I had the distinct privilege of getting to meet Dr. Thomas a little over 2 years ago when I went to Dallas to do airport interviews for the chief academic officer position here. And Sue was at SIU Edwardsville, and when she walked in the room and we began to converse about the opportunity here at Truman State University, she lit up the room. I was so impressed. I wasn't expecting to come across someone like Sue in those interview processes, but there she was. Ultimately, I offered her the job, and she agreed to come here. In the last 2 years, it has been an honor and a privilege to work side by side with Sue. And I'll talk more about this in a minute, but one of the reasons I feel okay about leaving is that there's someone like Sue who can step in, and she has all the skill, all the ability, all the passion, the commitment to be able to continue to move this university forward. She's not me, she's better than me. My relationship with her will continue, and my investment in her success, just like my investment in this university's success, will continue. My colleagues here at Truman. This is my administrative council. Now you all, those of you who work here, you have your colleagues, and you can have those photos of those people up. It could be faculty of their departments, other offices on campus.
But these are the people I work most closely with here at the university. And I can tell you, over my 8 years here at Truman, these are people who have invested in me, in my leadership, but also in me as a person. I have felt their support each and every step of the way, every day when we've come in here to do the hard work, make the hard decisions during very difficult times. These are people I have had the honor to come into 200 McLean every day and work with. So you might not realize this, but at night I'm a superhero. And one of the reasons Kirksville is a safe place to live is because of me and my godson, Evan. We roam the streets at night. I've made amazing friends. When you're the president of a university, especially in a small town, it can be a very isolating experience. There are not a lot of people who you can get close to, for a lot of reasons. Sometimes it's because you might have to make tough decisions that affect these people's lives. Some of it is, quite honestly, especially in academia and on university campuses, faculty don't want to be friends with administrators, especially the president. And you get a bad rap for that. Because usually it's the administrators, the bean counters, who are making those terrible decisions that might affect us and what we're doing in the classroom. I have not found that to be the case here. I have made close friends. People who work here, the staff, the administration, and on the faculty. And James and Heather Cianciola paid Kelly and myself the distinct honor of asking us to be their firstborn godson, godparents. And this is Evan. They now have another little boy named Ian. And that's just an example of the deep relationships we have formed here that we will take with us when we leave. Now, whoops. Now, she might not be happy being the representative of the faculty here, of those who I've made friends, but this is Julia Delancey. And she's one example of a very close and dear friend on the faculty who I've had the honor to get to know. And I've always been inspired by faculty ever since I walked into Dr. Nelson's class. Well, I can tell you I continue to be inspired by faculty. People like Julia and others on our faculty who give of themselves, who work so hard on behalf of students. They pour everything they have into their work. But similarly, they pour everything they have into their relationships, into their friendships. And I can tell you, Kelly and I have talked about this, is when we leave Kirksville, we're going to leave a place where we have formed some of the closest bonds in our life. Then I think of the students. And I think of the relationship I have formed with the students here at Truman State University. I said that the faculty inspire me. What I found here is that the students inspire me every bit as much, if not more. They are amazing and they give me hope. And actually, my relationship with students, I have felt, has given me the taste of transcendence. Investing in them has given me an opportunity to invest in the future, a future that I will probably not ever even see. The students have given me so much. I had the opportunity to teach a class last semester. I have an opportunity to be a faculty advisor for a couple student groups. And I can tell you the most rewarding time in my day is the opportunities I have, whether it's in my office or in the classroom or someplace else, getting to know students, getting to hear their stories, and getting to learn more about their hopes and dreams for the future. Truman is gifted with amazing students, and I'm not talking about your academic ability. I'm talking about the people you are. That just like my parents, you are committing yourself to lives larger than yourselves. What you always want to talk to me about is how are you going to make a difference in the world? How are you going to find your vocation where you can live your passion, but you can make a difference? That has been a gift. So, this is my brother Tommy. And, he's the oldest brother in the family. And you might see a resemblance, right? I have a little more hair, but, otherwise, there's a resemblance there. He was 17 years older than me, and so you can imagine someone who, 17 years older, I idolized him. He could do no wrong. He served in Vietnam, came back, went to divinity school, went in the ministry. He's the guy who lit up every room he entered. He was always the life of the party. He's the one people were always attracted to. You knew if there was going to be a family gathering and Tommy was going to be there, we were going to have a good time. Tommy brought the fun. But what was remarkable about Tommy is that he treated everyone the same. It did not matter who you were. You could be a millionaire or you could be a beggar. Everyone had the same experience when they got to know Tommy. Well, Tommy is the person who's taught me the most about grace, something that's pretty important when you're raised in a conservative fundamentalist home. He taught me the most about suffering. And he taught me the most about choosing to live a life of joy and gratitude, even though all of the circumstances around you tell you you should live otherwise. And choosing to live a life of joy and gratitude, regardless of your circumstances, is what gives you transcendence over those. When I think, now Tom, the reason I say all that about Tommy is that Tommy was diagnosed with ALS, and he ultimately died about 17 years ago. He died when he was 52, I'm 53, so I'm a little older than Tommy was when he died. And he had a 3-year struggle with this terrible disease. Lou Gehrig's disease is what most people know. And the way he handled that with grace, and as I said, continuing to live a life with joy and gratitude despite that suffering, was a remarkable thing for me to watch and learn from. I probably learned more about life from Tommy, but more importantly, I learned more about dying from Tommy. And when I think of him, I think of Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. And if you know Frankl, he was a Holocaust survivor, neurologist and psychiatrist. And he said that if life has any meaning at all, there must be meaning in suffering. Suffering and death are as much a part of the human experience as joy and life. Without suffering and death, life cannot be complete. Suffering expands our souls and gives us a greater capacity to feel. Yes, some of those feelings are anger, pain, despair, and depression. But they are also love, joy, strength, and peace. This is what I learned from my brother, that death defines life. We are all going to experience it. We are all going to suffer. But it's how you choose to live amid that suffering that gives your life meaning and expands your capacity to love. So I've talked a lot about people here at Truman who have meant so much to me, the students, my colleagues, the faculty, my friends, all of them, amazing people who have touched my life in a profound way. But when we think about our lives, sometimes those who touch you in the most profound way come from the most unexpected places. So these two amazing women here before me are the people I work with every day. They're the ones I spend the most time with, probably even more than my family, when you think about it. And so in many respects, they are my family. Now, I read once that the number one source of unhappiness is spending time with your boss. So I don't know if they feel the same way about me, but this is Kristen Kennedy and Tracy Hill. And amazing people come from the most unexpected places. What? Mansfield, Missouri? Population 1,500. Brashear, Missouri. What is it, Tracy? Population 250 or something like that? But these are the most remarkable people I've ever had the opportunity to go in each day and work with. Not only are they smart, committed, creative, hardworking, but they are gracious, they are kind, they've allowed me to be myself, they've seen sides of me none of you have seen, and still they have accepted me. Now it's possible they do it because I'm their boss, but I don't think so. I think I have a pretty good read on people. And if you knew what people like this at this university give to this place, you would be amazed. They don't get buildings named after them. They don't get a lot of attention. They don't get asked to do last lectures, and they're probably thankful for that. But these are the people who've impacted my life in the most profound way, from the simple acts that I get to observe every single day in my office. So my time here at Truman has reinforced something for me. For those of you who were around 6 years ago when I was installed as president, I gave an address. And the theme of my installation was celebrating community. And when I talked about community, I talked about how important community is for our democracy. I even sent an email out today emphasizing that Truman is a community. We're not an institution. We're interrelated. We're connected with one another. We care about one another. We don't just tolerate one another. We need one another. That's what living in community is. And I talked about how important it is for our democracy. But what I have learned in my time here and my relationships with these people is that community isn't only important for our democracy, it's important for our soul. These relationships that we form with one another is what gives us life. It's what gives our lives meaning. When I think of community, I'll tell you what I think of the most in this country in my experience, not from going, but from listening to others, having loved ones who've participated in it, is Alcoholics Anonymous. I've never been to an AA meeting. I have a loved one who does. And what I hear about the stories of AA is that you have people who go there, whether they are millionaires or beggars, doctors or drug dealers, and they all go and they start revealing secrets about one another. They start revealing who they are to one another. And when you strip all the other stuff away, how much money someone has or what kind of car they drive, they get down to the core and they come to a recognition that they are powerless. They are powerless over their addiction. They are powerless over being able to control other people's lives. And that ultimately, what they need more than anything is each other. When they talk about the higher power, some of them might mean God. Some of them might mean the transcendence that they experience through their relationship with one another. I am so inspired by the stories I've heard and the transformation that occurs as a result of participating in AA. I have control issues. I come from a family that thinks that we can do things to help people, to save them, especially our loved ones, right? When we see a loved one suffering, we want to be able to save them. And I have lived oftentimes with this false notion, if I just work hard enough, if I just do something, maybe I can control the situation. Maybe I can save this person, that person. Maybe I can help save Truman. Well, that's just ego. And so what I've started doing is actually carrying with me Reinhold Niebuhr's prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Because at the end of the day, the only thing that really matters is lending a hand to someone who needs it. Not that you can control them, not that you can save them, but you can lend them a hand because we need one another. So life and community now means so much more to me after my 8 years here than it did 6 years ago when I gave that address. And so the biggest thing I would want to leave with you at my last lecture is don't invest in things. Invest in people. Invest in your relationship. Probably the biggest thing that gives me heartache here at Truman is watching so many people suffering. Young people who need counseling, young people who are experiencing depression, anxiety, isolation, loneliness, shame. Everything that we know about the world is that all of these conditions are on the rise. And suicide is at an all-time high. The only antidote to the isolation that people are feeling that brings them to the precipice of killing themselves is being in relationship with others. That is the recipe to the loneliness that you feel. And it is why I care so deeply about this community and how we relate and support one another. So that brings me to the point of the talk where I talk about saying goodbye. Now, before I do that, I should mention that everything in this world, and even in our biological makeup, tells us that what we really should strive for are things like money, fortune, fame, physical pleasure. We're biologically wired to do that. It's how we sort of propagate the species. It's only through reflection and spiritual hard work that we recognize that those things only have extrinsic value and are going to pass. The only thing that has intrinsic value is that loving relationship, meaningful relationship that we have with one another. And I have found it here. So how do I leave it? And why am I saying goodbye? So this is me last August saying goodbye to my daughter, dropping her off at college. And I use this photo because I can remember how difficult that is, and anyone who's a parent who's dropped their kid off to college certainly can relate to the emotions that you're feeling at that time. My daughter, a very fragile state, and you're trying to be brave for her, saying goodbye. It's hard. Saying goodbye is hard. And in my own decision to say goodbye to Truman, as I said earlier, it was the hardest decision I ever made in my life. And it's so hard because of that strong sense of community I have felt here with everyone I've talked about and more. My family has felt it living in this Kirksville community. We sometimes laugh at the phrase, that you see on the sign driving to Kirksville where people make the difference. Well, you know what? People make the difference. And this is an amazing place because of it. I won't go into all the reasons why I ultimately decided that it was my time to go. But suffice it to say, I thought it was the right time, not just for me and my family, but for Truman as well. And I'm hoping, only time will tell, it's also right for Mary Washington. But in struggling with saying goodbye, I go back and I think about my brother Tom. And I remember him giving a sermon after he was diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease. And he said when that doctor came in after the tests, and he was not expecting this, I think he thought he had carpal tunnel or something like that. And the doctor came in a very matter-of-fact way and just said, you have ALS. You have Lou Gehrig's disease. And he can remember at that moment, first of all, the world spinning, him trying to sort of get a sense of where he was and what he just heard. And then he left the doctor's office, and as he was walking out, still in a fog, he said that the world split into two parts. The things that mattered and the things that didn't matter, right? We've all had those experiences probably in our lives when you've gotten the news, a diagnosis, word about a lost loved one. And all of a sudden, what's the most important thing in life becomes crystal clear. And in thinking about my own goodbye, saying goodbye is a form of dying. Not to be overly melodramatic. But when you go through a transition, you go through a process of grieving. And I've gone through my fair share of grieving over the last few months. But just like dying, this experience has allowed me to refocus on what is important in life. And it is crystal clear to me that what I've told you tonight is what is most important to me. That which I feel called to do, and the people in my life, the relationships I have formed, and taking that with me is something that is going to continue to give my life meaning. It's an empowering experience. Sometimes you have to say goodbye to be reminded of what is most important in your life. In saying goodbye to you, I want this opportunity to tell you how grateful I have been. I am to have had this time with you. How thankful that you have all let me into your life, that you have invested in me, and hopefully in a small way you have felt my investment in you. So I leave here with Elsa, just like my parents and all of those I talk to. You will always be a profound part of my life. With that said, in closing, I would like to just give you a little bit of taste of what you have meant to me in my time here.
You were a gypsy, I was one too. I only was one so I could meet someone like you. And in the morning, how blue the sky. I don't know why I never said goodbye. I don't know why I never said goodbye. You were a fortune teller, you read my hand. You said I'd leave you and go off to other lands. You said with a smile that one day I'd make you cry. I don't know why I ever said goodbye. I don't know why I never said goodbye. Don't know why the seasons change. Don't know why I am so strange. Don't know why I lose my heart again each time I hear your name. Don't know why I didn't stay. Don't know why I didn't say that I didn't know what love was, but I loved you anyway. How deep the ocean, how blue the sky. I don't know why I never said goodbye. I don't know why I ever said goodbye. I don't know why I ever said goodbye. I woke up and wished that I was dead, with an aching in my head. I lay motionless in bed. I thought of you, the way you're gone. Let the world spin madly on. And everything that I said I'd do, like make the world brand new. Take the time for you. I just got lost and slept right through the dawn, and the world spins madly on. I let the day go by. I always say goodbye. I watch the stars from my windowsill. The whole world is moving, and I'm standing still. I woke up, wished that I was dead, with an aching in my head. I lay motionless in bed. The night is here, the day is gone, and the world spins madly on. I thought of you, the way you're gone, and the world spins madly on. And the world spins madly on. And the world spins madly on. Yeah.